Hey friends, it's Jimmy with my usual reminder to hit the like and subscribe buttons and to drop a quick comment below saying where you're listening from. Also, it wouldn't be an introduction if I didn't beg you to ding the notification bell and turn on all those sweet notifications. Peter Winston was a mind so uniquely structured, so adept at visualizing complexity, that he seemed almost inhumanly capable of charting the future. A clinical psychologist, testing him at just 5 years old, didn't hesitate to label him a true genius. His brilliance wasn't limited to academic testing. It was proven on the unforgiving battlefield of the chessboard, where, still a teenager, he accomplished the unthinkable. At 14, he defeated the reigning U.S. chess champion Walter Brown in just 37 moves. Winston was destined for the top echelon of global chess, a path seemingly laid out by years of flawless calculation and competitive success. But this master, this boy who could project dozens of possible futures on the board, made one final, irreversible, and perfectly calculated move that stunned the world more than any victory. He walked away from his life on January 26, 1978, at just 19 years old, and his fate remains unknown till this day. Peter Winston was born on March 18, 1958, in New York City. His early environment was deeply conducive to exceptional intellectual development. His father held a teaching position in chemistry at Columbia University, and the family made their home in a 3-bedroom apartment situated on Riverside Drive in Manhattan. This academic setting fostered the early recognition of his prodigious capabilities. The trajectory of his life was set early on, confirming that his intellectual path was divergent from the mainstream. When he was only 5, Winston was enrolled at Sands Point Elementary, a specialized institution dedicated to gifted children located on Long Island. By 1964, when he was just 6 years old, his remarkable gifts had garnered national attention. Winston's ascent in the competitive chess world was nothing short of meteoric. The U.S. Chess Federation officially awarded him the highly coveted National Master title in 1972. To achieve this distinction at such a young age placed him among the most talented juniors in the country. It also suggested a Grandmaster title was well within reach and establishing a professional standard that would become crushingly difficult to sustain. His definitive career peak arrived in 1974 when he competed in the U.S. Junior Chess Championship in Philadelphia. Not only did he perform exceptionally well, but he shared the first-place prize with future Grandmaster Larry Christensen. This triumph solidified his place in the American chess landscape, leading the U.S. Chess Federation to send him to the prestigious World Junior Chess Championship in Manila. Although this trip marked his first major international competition, and he finished 8th, it served as a crucial trial, exposing him to the relentless pressure of global competition. Winston's peak chess rating was officially recorded in January 1975 at 2285. This objective measure of ability represented the height of his powers, and for a teenager, reaching this level was extraordinary. The intensity of his early massive success meant that his identity became wholly intertwined with his ability to maintain this towering standard. The period immediately following 1975 saw a profound and tragic shift in Peter Winston's life. Despite his external success and his internal processing power, the genius began struggling significantly with developing mental health problems as he entered his late teens. For someone whose reputation and self-worth were so intensely tied to the flawless operation of his mind, this psychological fracturing had disastrous consequences on his career. The decline was seen in his chess rating score, which dropped 65 points between 1975 to 1978, a period in which it had been projected to continue to rise substantially. Contemporaries and other chess players who knew him closely during this period corroborated the disturbing trajectory. They reported observing that his deteriorating mental state corresponded directly and tragically with a parallel erosion in his game performance. All that said, Winston's mental state was much worse at that time than anyone in the community could have imagined. While it wasn't known to his fellow chess players or the public at the time, in 1976 he had a mental breakdown and was hospitalized for a short period of time. He was ultimately diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition that can be managed with medication. Unfortunately for Winston, he believed that the lithium he had been prescribed had caused him a form of brain fog, which diminished his intellectual capacity. He believed that the medication he had been prescribed would ultimately make him unable to fulfill his dreams, and evidence suggests he wasn't compliant after he left the hospital. A telling incident, though not his final disappearance, occurred in 1977. According to one account circulated among the chess community, Winston competed in a tournament so disastrous that he lost every single game. For a player of his caliber, this was unthinkable, and immediately afterward, he abandoned the chess arena and didn't go home. Also, as I was editing this video, I noticed I used the term chess arena to describe where the pro chess tournaments happen, and honestly, I'm just going to leave that in. Interestingly, the chess officials who were umpiring the match deemed the result of the tournament to be mathematically impossible. They decided to throw out all the results, as they believed that the only way the result could have been reached is if Peter Winston threw the games intentionally. While he did eventually return, this desperate retreat was a clear and devastating precursor to his ultimate, complete withdrawal from life. It revealed a deep-seated inability to cope with the reality of failure, particularly when his identity was synonymous with success. He was searching for an escape from the unbearable expectations placed upon him by the world, and perhaps by himself. The life Peter Winston knew concluded abruptly on January 26, 1978. He was just 19 years old when he left his Manhattan home, vanishing completely without providing any explanation or leaving a trace. The date of his disappearance was mere hours before New York City was struck by the massive weather event that became known as the Great New York Blizzard of 1978. As one of the most severe snowstorms to hit the East Coast, the blizzard brought widespread disruption, heavy snowfall, and whiteout conditions. Given Winston's extraordinary intellectual capacity, it's highly improbable that the timing was coincidental. A mind trained to calculate complex scenarios many steps ahead would surely understand the implications of using such a catastrophe as a screen. He deliberately chose a moment of maximum environmental disruption, guaranteeing two critical outcomes. First, that any initial search efforts would be paralyzed and minimized by the weather, and second, that the elements themselves would collaborate to eradicate any evidence. This calculated use of uncontrollable, obliterating natural forces highlights the depth of his desire for absolute perfect concealment. Winston essentially utilized the blizzard as the ultimate opening gambit in his final irreversible game. Today, more than 47 years after that winter night, Peter Winston's status remains officially classified as missing. His parents, Leonard and Florence, continued to reside in their home on Riverside Drive, left with the agonizing and perpetual uncertainty of his fate. No substantial leads or verifiable evidence have ever been found to explain his calculated disappearance. Among the community of chess players who knew and competed against him, a somber consensus began to form early in the investigation. Given the clear evidence of his profound mental turmoil, the most commonly accepted theory among his peers was that Winston had tragically ended himself. However, others still clung to the hope that he simply used the massive snowstorm as a smokescreen to escape and start a new life far from New York City. Over the preceding decades, numerous sightings of Winston have been reported, but in the end, none have been verified. Personally, while I would like to believe that he simply wandered away from the pressure of the chess world, I don't think he survived. By January 1978, Winston likely believed that his mental health, his slipping performance, and his sense of intellectual erosion were not temporary obstacles, but permanent realities. For someone whose identity was inseparable from mental precision, this realization, regardless of whether it was accurate or not, may have felt terminal. The timing of his departure, just hours before the blizzard of 1978, suggests foresight rather than impulse as one would expect from a chess champ. A storm of that magnitude would naturally halt searches, erase tracks, and quickly transform certainty into ambiguity. In doing so, Winston may have believed he was offering his parents something gentler than the truth. The lack of a body meant no confirmation, and no confirmation meant hope, however painful, could survive. Picture the chilling silence of an Alaskan summer road trip, the promise of a future laid out across thousands of miles of northern highway. Now shift that image far south, deep into the British Columbia wilderness, to a mundane commercial setting, a car wash in the city of Prince George. It was here, hundreds of miles from the remote Yukon cafe where he was last seen alive, that the remnants of 23-year-old Philip Innes Fraser's journey were discovered. His vehicle, a black 1983 Volkswagen Jetta, had been torched in what appeared to be a calculated act of forensic evidence annihilation. The discovery of the car, 5 days into Philip's planned journey, immediately elevated his disappearance from a missing person case into something much more serious. Philip Innes Fraser was a young man of extraordinary promise, hailing from Anchorage, Alaska. At the age of 23, he was embarking on the trip that would begin the next defining chapter of his life. He was headed south to Evergreen State College in Washington to commence pre-med studies. Philip's aspiration to join the medical field wasn't accidental. It was part of a strong family tradition, and both his parents were physicians. This was a young man who had every expectation of a long and successful career, contributing positively to society. He had packed his life, including his essential belongings, into his Jetta for the thousands of miles of solitary driving ahead. As he began his journey across the border into Canada, he responsibly surrendered his handguns to authorities. This decision to follow the law would, ultimately, perhaps be his undoing, as it would lead him to be virtually defenseless against predators lurking in the desolate terrain. Philip's plan was simple: drive the necessary route to Washington, a journey that demanded traversing the immense, sparsely populated landscape of the Yukon Territory. On such highways, travelers often depend on a shared tacit agreement of mutual aid. A person experiencing car trouble might rely on the goodwill of strangers, and similarly, travelers are frequently inclined to offer assistance to others who are stranded. This inadvertently creates a vulnerability that predatory individuals can exploit. The last reliable sightings of Philip Fraser place him hundreds of miles north, at the 40-Mile Flats Cafe in the remote expanse of the Yukon. The witnesses there provided the key and most chilling details about the man who would eventually extinguish Philip's promising future. It was here that Philip encountered an unidentified hitchhiker. Witnesses distinctly observed Philip displaying a noticeable reluctance before finally agreeing to give the man a ride. This hesitation suggests that Philip felt an immediate sense of discomfort or recognized something unsettling about the stranger. Yet he proceeded. He was known to be good-natured, and he was perhaps driven by the social compulsion to aid a traveler in such a desolate location. It's this choice, this acceptance of a visibly tense situation, that defines the eerie circumstances of the case. The hitchhiker was described in what initially appeared to be contradictory terms. On one hand, He was noted as being clean-cut, suggesting an effort to maintain a respectable appearance, likely an attempt to appear less threatening to potential rides. On the other hand, multiple witnesses characterized him by a series of unsettling nervous habits and distinct physical markers. He was described as constantly smoking and biting his nails in between and exhibiting signs of extreme nervousness. This suggested to some witnesses that he could have been strung out on some sort of substance, though clearly Philip didn't see him quite this way. The most critical and enduring clue remains the description of the man's dental health. Despite being estimated to be only in his early 20s, the hitchhiker had distinctly rotted-looking teeth. This unique physical trait, coupled with the nervous disposition and chain-smoking habit, again suggested that he may have been some sort of addict. For whatever reason, perhaps the hitchhiker's attempt to look clean-cut, Philip sadly didn't acknowledge the red flags, or simply chose to believe the best in people. 8 hours later, roughly 200 miles south of the cafe, the hitchhiker flagged down a couple, telling them his car had broken down. They noticed he seemed nervous, but assumed he was simply uneasy about being alone in the area. In a disturbing twist, the couple agreed to tow him back to their home and even let him stay overnight in their basement. But then things got even more twisted when, the next morning, the hitchhiker with the rotten teeth introduced himself as Philip Fraser. He claimed his parents were doctors in Anchorage and said he was headed to Washington State to study medicine. He also mentioned wanting to sell his car to buy a plane ticket. The couple suggested waiting until Monday, but the hitchhiker refused, insisting he needed to leave immediately to get to his classes. They weren't instantly suspicious, but they noticed that he had 2 different wallets, which struck them as odd. Personally, I think my suspicion would have been triggered by juxtaposing his dental status with the socioeconomic status of the vagrant's so-called family. That said, maybe I've just researched and written too many true crime videos now that this is an instant flag for me. Eventually, the Jetta was fixed up, and the imposter rapidly vanished. Suspicion grew when he pulled out 2 wallets and began acting secretive. He went outside to fix the car, which had a broken fan belt, then suddenly drove off and vanished. About 12 hours after he left the home, Philip's burned-out car was discovered at a car wash in Prince George, British Columbia, roughly 300 miles away. 6 weeks later, on July 27th, Philip's body was found in a gravel turnaround, about 70 miles from the Olsons' home. Ultimately, the case would grow cold despite a massive degree of attention in both the United States and Canada. While investigators have tried to tie the hitchhiker to a number of high-profile Canadian serial predators, nothing has ever come of this line of reasoning. Also, just as a quick aside, this is one of the creepiest segments ever on Unsolved Mysteries, and I still can't figure out how he got away with it, despite there being so many witnesses. It's hard for me to believe that no one ever recognized this predator, given the highly distinct nature of his appearance. This crime scene wasn't a shadowy alley or a deserted industrial park. It was a dorm room on East Beach Street in Long Beach, New York. For the observant Orthodox Jewish community that maintained the Yeshiva of Long Beach, this building was a place of rigorous study and prayer. Yet, in the early hours of Saturday, November 1st, 1986, this inner sanctum was violated by an act of savage, focused violence. The victim was Chaim Weiss, a diligent 11th grade rabbinical student at the Torah High School of Long Beach. He lived the kind of life expected in a yeshiva setting, devoted to his studies and steeped in tradition. And just for a bit of context, this is a Jewish educational institution that focuses on intensive study of Jewish law and traditional texts, usually with the aim of becoming a rabbi. He was nearing his 16th birthday, just 2 weeks short of that milestone, when his life was violently cut short. Haim was last observed alive sometime between 12:45 a.m. and 1 a.m. on Saturday morning, having been seen by a study partner that night. The discovery was made around 7:30 by a dormitory supervisor who realized Haim had failed to appear for morning prayers. The resulting crime scene was perplexing. Haim had been brutally bludgeoned to death with the back end of a hatchet. The impact was so devastating that it crushed his skull and severed his spinal column. Despite the sheer force required to inflict such an injury, there were no signs of a physical struggle in the room. Furthermore, none of the other students in the crowded dormitory heard any sounds of commotion during the early morning hours. There was no forced entry into the building, no evidence of robbery, and no signs of any other form of assault. The lack of struggle and forced entry demonstrated that the killer possessed an extraordinary level of access and stealth. This reinforced the conclusion that the crime was intensely personal and delivered with focused, premeditated rage. What made the scene truly unique and definitively pointed to an insider was the subsequent staging of the victim's room. Investigators found that Haim's body had been moved from the bed and placed on the floor, and then moved again slightly to a new location, perhaps 2 feet away. Furthermore, the window to his room was left wide open on that chilly November morning. Detectives quickly realized these weren't random acts of disarray, but instead bore a powerful cultural signature. According to Jewish tradition, it's customary to open a door or window to allow the spirit to leave the dwelling, and to remove a body from the bed following death. These actions strongly indicated that the perpetrator possessed specific esoteric knowledge of Orthodox Jewish customs concerning death and mourning. The presence of this ritualistic post-mortem staging provides a disturbing layer of complexity. This was a person capable of inflicting extreme violence, yet was simultaneously quote-unquote sensitive enough to adhere to religious protocols. This suggested that the perpetrator must have been a highly devout individual who, even after committing this horrific act, insisted upon strict adherence to religious tradition. Given that a yeshiva is the exact sort of place where you find someone who is highly religious and well aware of Jewish tradition, the investigators immediately focused inwards. The immediate investigative response was hampered by the day on which the slaying was discovered. Since November 1st, 1986, was the Sabbath, police encountered significant procedural difficulties. Orthodox Jewish laws restrict activity on the Sabbath, including the prohibition against writing or the use of electronic devices. This created an initial delay because many of the students refused to give statements until the next day. This delay would cause significant problems since it essentially stalled out the investigation during those crucial first 48 hours. Despite the challenges, a crucial piece of forensic evidence was secured and preserved, a single strand of hair found near Haim's body that did not belong to him. In 1986, police departments lacked the sophisticated DNA testing capabilities available today. Fearing that inadequate testing procedures might ruin this irreplaceable sample, investigators made the calculated decision to conserve the hair strand at the time. The FBI conducted a profile of the killer early on, concluding that the perpetrator was someone known to Haim and likely close to his age. While the leading theory remains that the perpetrator was one of his classmates, no suspects have ever been named, and the case eventually went cold. A new potential clue emerged in 1994 when someone defaced Haim's gravesite with a Hebrew word meaning killed. It's unclear who committed this act of vandalism or why, though some believe that this was an effort by the perpetrator to re-traumatize his parents. Ultimately, though, there's no evidence to indicate this is actually the case, and police have noted that the Hebrew letters were drawn incorrectly. To me, this seems to suggest that whoever did this likely wasn't someone from the yeshiva, since I assume they would be able to write these letters without any difficulty. That said, of course, it's always possible that this was the exact reason the perpetrator did it, perhaps to throw the investigators off his scent. In May 2013, 27 years after the slaying, the Nassau County Police Department officially reopened the investigation. Police announced plans to re-interview over 100 former students and faculty members, hoping that the passage of time would loosen tongues. They also committed to testing the hair sample found on the site, though ultimately it's unclear what result came of this, if any. I note that this was in 2013, which was long before the advent of forensic genetic genealogy. If the hair did indeed belong to the perpetrator, this may be the clue to cracking this case wide open once and for all. It's interesting to note that Jewish Americans are amongst the most likely groups to take ancestry tests. This means that if the attacker came from inside the yeshiva, and if that hair was actually the perpetrator's, forensic genetic genealogy would be highly effective in this case. Hey everyone, just a quick reminder to click the share button and send this video to your friends and family. Also, don't forget to check out the YouTube membership and the Patreon. You can join up for as little as $1 a month. Tiffaine Véron is a French woman who vanished while vacationing in Japan in the summer of 2018. Born in 1982, Véron was 36 years old and worked as a school teaching assistant in France. A seasoned traveler and enthusiast of Japanese culture, she had meticulously planned a 3-week solo trip to Japan, a destination where she had been before. After arriving in Tokyo on July 27, 2018, Tiffaine traveled to the historic city of Nikko, about 100 miles north of Tokyo, that's known for its temples and scenic forests and mountains. She checked into the Turtle Inn in Nikko and spent much of her first day sightseeing. Notably, a typhoon had hit the area on July 28th, which slowed her down as many of the local trails were still in bad shape. On the morning of July 29th, Tiffaine was seen eating breakfast at the inn. She left on foot around mid-morning with a small shoulder bag, leaving all her other belongings, including her luggage, passport, and travel documents, in her room. Unfortunately, she never came back, and the inn's owner reported her missing the next day when she failed to return by July 30th. Tiffaine's last known movements remain largely speculative due to the lack of clear evidence. Multiple witnesses saw her at breakfast on July 29th before she headed out to sightsee. One tourist's photograph from that morning even captured Tiffaine during breakfast in the background, which is always helpful given the fragility of memory. A backpacker later claimed he saw a woman matching her description around midday, walking alone on a forest path in the area. This sighting, if accurate, placed Tiffaine in the wooded trails of Nikko hours after leaving the hotel. This is a detail that raised eyebrows, because heavy rain from the prior day's typhoon had made trails slippery and less frequented by tourists. Tiffaine's family also discovered from her online data that her phone connected to the internet for the last time around 10:30 that morning, after which all signals ceased. When Tiffaine failed to show up or contact anyone by the following morning, it became clear something had gone wrong. Notably, Tiffaine suffered from epilepsy and required medication to manage it. Local authorities responded promptly once Tiffaine was reported missing. The immediate concern was perhaps in the excitement of travel she had forgotten to take a dose of her medication, which led to her falling on the typhoon-battered trail. Within days, dozens of police officers and volunteers were scouring the area, but initially found no trace of her movements. Search efforts focused on the rugged terrain around Nikko, which features dense forests, rivers, and hiking paths. The region's geography is both scenic and perilous, with steep mountain trails and fast-flowing streams where a person could slip and get severely injured, or fall into a typhoon-swollen river. Early search operations included teams on foot, police dogs, divers checking the river, and drones scanning from above. Helicopters were also deployed to survey the mountainous areas around Nikko, particularly near the Daya River and a scenic gorge called Kanmangafuchi Abyss, where tourists often walk. And despite the name, this abyss is actually extremely scenic. And if you're one of those people who just listen, I'd suggest looking at your screen now if you're at all into nature. Despite these extensive efforts, no definitive clues were found in the initial weeks. Tiffane's phone and personal items, aside from those left in her room, were never recovered, and there were no confirmed sightings on security cameras or by other hikers in the days following. As days turned into weeks, Tiffane's family took active roles in the search and investigation. The French embassy in Japan notified her relatives of her disappearance on August 1st, 2018. And to foreshadow a bit, her case has become something of an international incident. Shortly after they were informed, Tiffane's sister and brothers flew to Japan to aid in the search and meet up with local authorities. They initially praised the Japanese police's efforts, but rapidly grew anxious about the pace of the investigation, as well as the focus on an accident rather than foul play. One early complication was that Tiffane's hotel room had been cleaned and rebooked by the innkeeper very soon after she vanished. Unfortunately, this occurred before police could thoroughly examine it. This potentially disturbed a primary scene and made it harder to collect forensic evidence. Language barriers also posed challenges. The Véron family needed translators to communicate with Japanese police, which slowed the exchange of information. Further, Japanese police have consistently maintained there were no clear signs of criminal activity in Tiffane's case, treating it as a missing person case, possibly due to an accident. Indeed, from early on, the Tochigi Prefectural Police leaned toward the hypothesis that Tiffane might have fallen into the river behind her hotel and been swept away. This theory is based on the area's dangers. The inn is near a river, and a fall could be fatal. However, the family found it unconvincing given that thorough searches of the river for several miles turned up no body or belongings. Nonetheless, the family remained determined in the face of adversity. They appeared on Japanese television to plead for help, distributed flyers around Nikko with Tiffane's photo, and spoke with anyone who might have been in the area at the time. By mid-August 2018, roughly 2 weeks into the search, police intensified their efforts around known tourist spots. Despite these thorough searches and even periodic helicopter sweeps of the mountains over the following months, no physical evidence was found. By the end of 2018, authorities indicated they would not conduct new large-scale ground searches unless credible new clues emerged, though they continued to keep an eye out during aerial surveys. Over the course of 2019, numerous investigations were undertaken by the family, as well as private Japanese citizens looking to help in the case. But again, no signs turned up. Tiffane Véron's family has been relentless in pushing for a deeper investigation, both in Japan and through international channels. Within weeks of her disappearance, they reached out to high-level officials for support. Tiffane's mother wrote to French President Emmanuel Macron in August 2018, pleading for more resources and attention on the case. Over the years, the Véron family has organized multiple trips back to Japan, met with police, and held numerous press conferences to keep the spotlight on the case. They've funded private investigators and experts, and even turned to European institutions for support. Their lobbying has caused French members of the European Parliament to press Japan on its obligations of legal cooperation with the EU in such cases. This international pressure has caused Japanese police to keep investigating the case. From the outset, theories about what happened to Tiffaine Véron have centered on two main possibilities: a fatal accident or foul play. As already discussed, the Japanese investigators have generally favored the accident hypothesis, having found no evidence in support of foul play. I'm not going to fully go through it again, but they generally focus on the fact that she may have been walking near a river on a slippery path and may have had a seizure or sudden fainting spell. All the evidence for this is circumstantial, and no trace of Tiffany has ever been found in the area of the river. The other leading explanation is foul play, which Tiffany's family firmly believes is the more likely scenario, and several factors fuel this theory. Tiffany disappeared in broad daylight from a populated tourist town, which is in and of itself highly unusual. The fact that her phone abruptly went offline is seen as suspicious by some. The family interprets this as a sign that something sudden and violent happened, since a simple fall wouldn't necessarily destroy a phone or prevent it from at least pinging the network. Though that said, if she had fallen into the water, this provides a rational alternative explanation for why her phone may have suddenly went offline. Of course, there's always the potential that her phone charge simply ran out, and this entire phone battery issue is a red herring. More troubling is something that emerged from local reports about a sinister individual targeting female tourists traveling alone. This man, who operated in the Nico area, pretended to be a friendly guide to these women, but in reality was known to harass them and assault them when they rejected his advances. This raised alarm that Tiffany could have encountered someone with ill intentions. Police later tracked this man down and interrogated him. They've officially stated that this individual was not in the area at the time and was not considered a suspect, but the mere existence of such a person added to fears of foul play. Further, the family also has concerns that the Japanese police investigative files were either incomplete or that the investigation itself was of poor quality. Others have speculated that another criminal might have taken advantage of her trust, given the reputation of Japan as one of the safest countries in the world. Other less prevalent theories have occasionally been floated, though they have essentially no supporting evidence. One is that Tiffany might have chosen to disappear intentionally for personal reasons. Others have proposed the potential for a wild animal encounter gone wrong, but again, no supporting evidence exists. As of now, Tiffany's family continues to strongly advocate for justice for her and won't let her case be forgotten. For the fishermen of 12th century Orford, England, a small but vital port on the Suffolk coast, the ocean was their livelihood, but it was also a churning, mysterious void. Sometime around the year 1167, a group of these fishermen, trawling off the shifting shingle of Orford Ness, felt their nets grow unusually heavy. They strained, anticipating a great haul, but what they pulled from the depths was not a bounty of fish. It was what was described as a wild man. The account, recorded by a contemporary chronicler, describes the fisherman's shock and awe. He was covered in hair, particularly on his chest, and was distinguished by a long, shaggy beard. This was no seal or walrus. It was something disturbingly human. Terrified and bewildered, the fishermen didn't know what to do. They brought their fantastic catch to the highest authority in the town, Bartholomew de Glanville, the Castellan of Orford Castle. The Castellan, upon seeing the so-called creature, was shocked and had no idea what exactly he was laying his eyes upon. So he did the natural thing and locked the wild man up in the keep. The wild man was held for 6 months in the castle. His behavior, meticulously recorded by the chronicler Ralph of Coggeshall, only deepened the mystery. He was utterly silent. His only communication came in the form of grunting. He ate a lot, but with a bizarre, specific ritual. He preferred his food raw. He would take fresh fish, press them tightly between his hands to wring out every drop of moisture, and only then would he eat the dry flesh. This detail, so strange and particular, feels less like a monster trope and more like a genuine, baffled observation. He also followed a natural rhythm, seeking his bed at sunset and remaining there until sunrise. The Castellan and his men, desperate to categorize their prisoner, subjected him to the two great tests of the 12th century, intended to prove humanity or sentience. After all, these people lived in a time when it was widely accepted and believed that dog-headed men were real, and craved salvation for their sins just as much as a human. The first was for logos, or reason, which was proven by speech. Despite all their efforts, he remained mute. The second test was for a soul. They took him to church to see if he would recognize the sacred. The experiment was a horrifying failure. The alleged creature showed no sign of any form of belief, failing to kneel or bow his head. He was, in their eyes, an unclassifiable object, a being with the shape of a man, but with neither speech nor soul. The story would be lost to history if not for its recorder. Ralph of Coggeshall, the man who wrote the account in his Chronicon Anglicanum around 1200, wasn't a writer of fantasy. He was the abbot of Coggeshall Abbey, a Cistercian monk, and a serious chronicler of politics and church affairs. But like many medieval historians, Ralph's worldview included marvels and wonders, as well as routine miraculous occurrences. He is the same source who recorded the equally strange tale of the Green Children of Woolpit, which I've discussed before. To Ralph, these events weren't fake. They were factual reports from the fringes of God's creation, and it was his duty to record them accurately. The 12th century mind didn't see the world as we do. The sea was a place of profound mystery, and maps like the Mappa Mundi depicted mermaids alongside fish. So, what did the fishermen really catch? Historians today are, of course, skeptical of mermen, but they generally agree that something very unusual happened at Orford. The detailed report, naming the specific castellan, makes it unlikely to be a total fabrication. The theories are all, in their own way, tragic, considering the fate of the wild man. It's possible he was a feral human, an outcast living wild. He may also have been suffering from a severe mental illness. But perhaps the most compelling and plausible theory is that he was a traumatized foreigner. He could have been a sailor, perhaps Flemish or Spanish, shipwrecked and suffering from profound trauma. Some have even suggested he may have been from North Africa, given his lack of reverence for the church environment. His lack of reaction in the church would be perfectly understandable for a man in shock, or for someone who wasn't a Christian. His grunts may have been a language his captors simply didn't recognize. His feral state could be explained by starvation and exposure, and his preference for raw fish might be the desperate habit of a survivor. The most common modern dismissal, that he was a misidentified animal like a seal or a walrus, crumbles under scrutiny. The Suffolk coast, particularly Orford Ness, is now a major colony for gray seals. But the Chronicle is insistent on his humanoid form, claiming that the wild man in essence looked totally human. If it were a seal or a walrus, it's highly unlikely that these maritime people would have been fooled by the wild man. Further, a seal or a walrus face doesn't look human, and there's a perfect animal the people could have described it as. They could have said that he had a face that resembled a dog, and in the case of a seal, it even barks. Perhaps most damningly for this outright dismissal, the wild man was held captive for 6 months. It is simply not credible that a royal castellan, his guards, and the entire town would mistake a seal or a walrus for a man at close range for half a year. The story of the wild man is almost certainly a human tragedy, misunderstood through a medieval lens. The story's ending is as strange as its beginning. The castellan, perhaps growing weary of his silent prisoner, eventually allowed him to be taken to the harbor for a swim. But he took precautions, penning the man in the water with a number of strong nets. The wild man immediately dove under the nets and resurfaced on the other side. His captors thought this was an act of mockery, but they were wrong. The wild man swam under the net and returned back to his captors. It was a brilliant, calculated move, showing that this so-called unthinking wild man likely had the ability to strategize. He remained with his captors for 2 more months. His test escape and voluntary return had lulled his guards into complacency. Then 2 months later, after fooling everyone into thinking he was a good prisoner, he simply left the keep and fled back into the sea, never to be seen again.